Pleasure to welcome you all this evening on behalf of Digital at INSEAD and the INSEAD Emerging Markets Institute. This is the first tech talk that we're hosting in Singapore, and judging from, by how many of you made it here on Tuesday evening after your busy work day, clearly this is something that is of interest. And in the quick conversations that I had with some of you, you're looking forward to the next one already, so we're very happy that we've managed to launch this here in Singapore. Now, emerging and existing digital technologies and the implications they have for business, for management, for society is something that we are focused on here at INSEAD. And in fact, Digital at INSEAD pretty much does that. And the idea is that if you're skilled and you're informed, you're going to be able to optimize the many opportunities that these digital technologies throw up. And otherwise, the opportunities can feel more like challenges. So those are some of the things that we will be exploring in the series of tech talks that we will be hosting here. Now, in terms of what we want to do with these talks, the idea is to start discussions, to have interactive sessions, to have your inputs also into what we are talking about. So do feel free to ask questions as we go along, and we have kept enough time at the end to have a proper discussion with you also, because that's a very important part of this for us. We want to make sure that we hear from you, and we will learn from you too. Going along, if you think of some other theme that we should be featuring in our tech talks, if you think of speakers that we should be featuring in tech talks, these could be leading academics, they could be practitioners, innovators, young tech wizards who can do some reverse mentoring. Anything that you think about, do feel free to write into us, give us your feedback and suggestions. Somewhere in this slide deck, I know we have a link that I'm supposed to show you where you can write into us with any suggestions and feedback that you might have. So do please use this link and send us your suggestions. This is the first, as I said, this is our pioneer session, and so we hope to make it successful with your inputs and your suggestions. Now, moving on to today's discussion, clearly the topic resonates with all of you here this evening. We're going to be talking about customer centricity in the digital age, when and why big data can yield big insights. And to present this, we have Professor David Dubois. I'm going to embarrass him a little bit by introducing him to you properly now. He has many distinctions to his credit, so I picked a few to share with you this evening. So Professor David Dubois is the Associate Professor of Marketing and the Cornelius Group Fellow in Digital Analytics for Consumer Behavior here at INSEAD. And he also co-directs our program on leading digital marketing strategy. The core of David's research and teaching intersects the psychology of technology, customer centricity, and brand management. And he helps a lot of professionals and organizations in two different things, which are very interesting: to unlock and deliver customer value through analytics and to successfully drive their digital transformation. In recognition of many publications that he's done, some top publications included, he was named the 2017 Young Scholar by the Marketing Science Institute. He's also among the top 40 global best-selling case authors for 2 years running in 2018 and most recently in 2019. He's written some very successful cases, including two that are particularly relevant to the discussion this evening: a case on L'Oréal Paris, its big data strategy, and another one on the digital transformation at Accor Hotels. So clearly he's the best possible person to be talking to us about big data and what we can possibly do with it. So without further ado, please join me in welcoming Professor David Dubois.
All right, thank you. Let's see if it works. Great. The technology works. Great. All right. Good evening, everyone. How are you doing? Good. Thank you so much for being so many of you at such a late time in the day. It's really a pleasure to have you around. For how many of people is it the first time at INSEAD? Do we have INSEAD first timers? Okay. So welcome everyone who's here at INSEAD. I see also many of our badges, different colors, so students and people maybe who work here, and it's really a delight to see so many of you this evening. So not going to repeat where I come from, but just to give you a little bit of more information. I've been in Singapore for 5 months. I've been at INSEAD overall for 7 years. So I was 6 years on our French campus, and this is my first year in Singapore. Really enjoy the warm weather, really enjoy all of the great things that Singapore can offer. And just to give you a little bit of background about like who I am and how I got interested in technology, let me share with you like how I started my interest. So as you know now by my accent, I'm a French guy. I'm actually one of the few French faculty at INSEAD. I think it was so much to have like one French faculty in the French campus that they said, no, you have to come to INSEAD Singapore, that's too much. And essentially, I have a background in advertising strategy. I was ironically starting to work on the first website design back in the days. And my interest for consumption and later technology came when I was about 20, had the opportunity to spend a year in exchange in Japan. And there I found I found two incredible things. So one was I discovered that elsewhere in the world, there was a lot of people who would buy French luxury brands. Actually, when I was in my train car, there was between 30 and 40% of the people who were owning like a Vuitton bag or something. So that sparked my interest for understanding the psychology of consumption, and particularly the consumption of luxury and status goods. And then there was another aspect which really struck me was that the moment I stepped into Japan, at the time, I felt like I was stepping in the future. Technology everywhere, buttons, share, screens, etc. And so that sparked another interest in me, which was how do people generally interact with technology? Do we behave differently when we're online than we're offline? How does it affect human thinking, human feeling, and human decision making? And so I've kept essentially both of these research areas quite active. And when I joined INSEAD, I created two courses. One was around value creation in luxury and fashion, and the other was a course on digital and social media strategy, in addition to the program that I am co-directing. So led to a few things I'm doing around power, style, status, and luxury consumption. And on the other hand, love to talk about starting from the customer, starting from the human being, how do we behave online, and how can companies leverage these new sorts of value and embed it in their processes to gain and to create novel values, novel processes. So what I have for you is actually about like 30, 40 minutes of content. Feel free to be as interactive as you want. This is again meant to be a Q&A. We also have some time to talk more toward the end, so we can have more complex discussions maybe toward the end. So let me first start with the topic of the day. So big data. So one thing I like to do about big data, rather than starting with a definition, is looking at what people do, in particular what people search about big data. So I'm a big fan of a tool called Google Trends. How many of you know Google Trends? Familiar? All right, so about like 50%, that's good. So Google Trends, for those of you who don't know, I'm sure you'll be all going to transform a lot of you into Google Trends advocates by the end of this session, is a free tool which basically helps you to recover global search data, and you can do this obviously at a fairly granular level of information. And so here, I just did this graph yesterday. I'm just looking at what is the search trends. So how many people search for big data, machine learning, and IoT, which are some of the more recent trends, right? And so what you see here is a kind of classic graph where you see different successive waves of disruptions, okay? So you see here big data in blue, which is actually the first one to rise, okay? And then you see second one, which is the yellow one, which is more about IoT. And then later you see something rising, which is more around the line of machine learning. Is that interesting? Yes, it shows like successive waves of big data. It shows that the media focuses alternatively on the most promising technologies. But one thing that catches my attention when I look at this graph is that there's actually a lot of that it shows that the big data search patterns seem to plateau after a while. So there is a kind of promising growth, right? And then quickly enough, it kind of goes, it kind of plateaus, it's been stable, and even, one could say it's actually going to go down, that it kind of loses traction. So I just wanted to, before getting into the meat of what I mean by big data and how we can use big data for customer value, wanted to show you, or to share with you a few reasons for me about why big data is not as important. It doesn't have enough as much traction, at least in these millions of search patterns. I'm going to skip this. So one of them is because we thought at the beginning that big data was very sexy. It's a sexy term. It's big. It's data. It's like, wow. I ought to do something with it. And so there was a lot of promise in the press about how you can quickly turn around some of this data into novel products, into novel services, and really improve satisfaction, drive new growth through customer acquisition. And then what happened is that the media became a little bit more ambivalent. That's the most we can say about big data, right? It's actually not that easy, right? So not that easy to integrate digital analytics, not that easy actually turning big data into money can prove harder than expected, right? So maybe, the media and the impression that we have about big data is not as positive as it could be. Now, there's another actually connotation associated with big data that is probably contributing to the fact that big data is plateauing, right? And that is the negative connotation with privacy. Whenever we start talking about big data, it's like privacy, we know all these leaks and these data breaches. This is actually something I pulled up yesterday, which is the list of data breaches from 2015 to actually right now in 2020, and you can see there are many of them, right? So that also may have contributed to picturing big data as not something really pleasant and something that needs to be used and leveraged with caution. There are a couple of other things that I think we're not in favor of big data. One of them is actually the use of analogies that are very simple, but are very misleading. In particular, a lot of people, a lot of pundits said, well, big data is the new oil. Now, when you think about oil, you think about something, a fairly easy process. You go to the gas station, you have 5 different types of gases, you put the gas in the tank, and then you leave. This is, I think, quite misleading because there are many different types of data, and the way you really infuse data into the decision-making, into where and how companies create value for their customers is more like, to me, a goldsmith than actually has something to do with oil, okay? And it's not only that big data is old, but when you think about the research and what we all know about big data, what has been published, it's been mostly descriptive. Right? So we all know about the 4 V's of big data. Volume has to be big. Variety, there's many different sources. Velocity, it's fast, so it's ongoing. And they're differently reflective of what's happening in the real world. Right? So actually, let me skip this. So actually, when you think about why big data still is losing traction, I think there's one potential reason, which is hazardous analogies, right? Is data more like oil, or is it more like diamond, with a goldsmith that really is about refining the data and infusing it into the decision-making process of companies up to the point where it creates value to the customers? That's a question. The second one is that there's a lot of focus on the features of the technology, on the features of the data, the volume, the veracity, etc., rather than the meaning of the data, and particularly the psychological meaning of the data. What does it reveal about human thinking, human feelings, and human behavior? Something very similar, which is that it was more descriptive than predictive, right? So it's really about what the data look like than what the data could do for you. And finally, something very subtle, but something that I think is very important, is there is a lot of emphasis about data integration rather than insight integration. Now, this is a very subtle difference. What do I mean by that? Any idea? What's the difference between data and insight? You guys are silent. Too silent. Please. So data is the raw data, right? It can come into many, many forms. Insight is data that is actionable, right? That you can actually put into a marketing strategy, put into an HR strategy, etc. And so, a lot of focus, to your point, has been about how do we gather different types of data rather than thinking more about the process, okay? How do we make sure that obviously we channel the right data, but more importantly, we integrate the data into our processes to respond faster to consumer demand, to create new processes, et cetera, okay? So my response to what we can do about this is we have to start with the customer, okay? And rather than starting with the technology, let's start about the customers and what type of data can we leverage, can we gather about him or her. So I have this picture for you. What is this picture representing? Not everyone at the same time. So these are footprints of people who are are they lost? Are they lost? Is there some sort of direction? Not everyone at the same time? What was that? Sorry, I didn't hear. They're taking different directions, right? So at first it looks very messy, okay? But then if you think about it, it's just footprints of people who are on the beach, and they're probably going to bathe at some point over here. So one of my intimate secrets is actually I've always wanted to be a beach owner. How great is that, right? So let's imagine we're a beach owner, and these are the footprints of the different people, and we have to manage how well all of these guys go and bathe in the beautiful sea. Let's imagine it's a very nice beach in Australia or northern France, right? So there are a lot of different messy parts, but what we see actually is that the customer journey is quite recognizable. Actually, everyone has to go and they start over there, okay? You cannot go from the beach outside of these two rocks, right? And then you see that different patterns. So some people diverge here. There are some people who are at crossroads, right? So there may be on platforms, or there may be on media platforms. And then basically what you do is that as they are going through the beach, there are different segments or sub-segments that are appearing, okay? So here, for instance, you have romantic sub-segment 1, a very romantic couple here, okay? There's another couple over there, and then this would be us. I'm a father of 2 right now, so we have a 4-year-old and a 1-year-old at home. So this looks more like a bunch of elephants, like all going to the beach. Now, these are very messy, but at the same time, I find it's a very good analogy for understanding how can we leverage digital data from consumers. Every time we interact on a digital device, I see some of you on mobile, on your laptop, on emails, we leave a footprint. And this footprint can easily be recovered. And so the goal of the games for a lot of organizations, a lot of brands right now, is really how can we recover the meaningful footprints that are out there and recreate the customer journey. Okay? So different footprints might be differently indicative of where people are in the customer journey. This is quite messy, but you could think, hey, I start with Google, with Bing, or Yandex, so some sort of search. Then I look for different products on Amazon. Then maybe I'm not sure, so I'm going to ask for a friend. Okay? Then I go back, etc. And then ultimately you decide to purchase the product. Okay? So where to start? We've done a lot of work here in INSEAD, and we'd like to suggest like a framework that looks at the 5 easiest and most prominent footprints that pretty much everyone, both in B2C and B2C, in B2C and B2B, leave behind them. So, you know, at INSEAD also, that's another thing. Every INSEAD prof, we need to have an iceberg type of framework, okay? So this is my version of the framework. So some of the data is public data, okay? So everyone can see it. Some of the data is private data. And that's kind of the meaning of the framework, right? And so that is supposed to kind of reflect a very generic customer journey. Obviously, it may differ depending on your specific industry, your specific country, but it can act as a useful template for knowing where to start, right? So typically, it starts with some sort of search, right? I am really a big fan of search because it can reflect a lot of different behaviors that are tied to interest. You know, it's some sort of intent. I'm interested in something. So who is searching? Everyone. Lots of potential application for understanding the consideration set of customers. Okay? What are people thinking? What are the associated keywords that they have? And what is the level of interest for different things over time? Remember the Google Trends example at the beginning. When are people interested in big data? When are they interested in IoT? When are they interested in machine learning? Okay? Then you've got another search, which is highly prominent. Actually, most people here would use, which is social media. Right? So we're all consumers of social. Now, the way we post is slightly different. Okay? It's going to be mostly the people who really like something. So you're encouraging your friend, or you're saying, you know, I really like this brand, which are the aficionados, or the people whom I would call the detractors. Okay? So the people who are, you know, I don't really like you, and I'm going to complain about you. Now, while search was really very important to understand quantitative insights, the trillions and trillions of searches every day, social is much more qualitative in essence. Okay, you've got lots of images, lots of emojis, lots of like these different things that you can easily recover. So it will be a lot of insights about emotions, brand image, conversations, etc., etc. There are also fewer people who are on social every day. I would say, let me ask the question at the end, after the framework. So the two other steps that are actually happening under the iceberg are site behavior. So what websites are you going to visit? What is going to be the behavior in the website? Are you going to have a variety of people who are first-timers? And maybe we'll see many websites of your visits. So these will be the novice customers. Or are you going to have people who spend a lot of time on very specific pages, which are indicative of very deep interest? Okay? So all of these obviously need to be recovered, needs to be analyzed, and it needs to be transposed into understanding the customer. Then you've got a lot of shopping behavior. Okay, so all the data you can recover from Amazon, some of the platforms that you guys are interacting with. And then there's a last one, which I call sensory, which is basically all the behavioral insights we get from when we use our mobile. Okay, sleep patterns, how we run, how we jump, where we are, etc. So increasingly, the very high level detail of information about the customers. Okay, so some of these footprints will be public. Okay, they'll be private. Some of these will be public, and they'll be social. And some of these footprints will be private behaviors. Now, just to get a sense of the room, how many people have searched at least once on a search engine over the last day? Okay, so this is a referendum. Okay, so this is very typical. I mean, everyone at least has searched once, either on Google, on Yandex, for those of you who may come from Russia, on Naver, for some of you who may come from South Korea, etc., etc. How many people have checked their social media, some sort of social media, in Instagram, LinkedIn, etc. So you see that the hands, there are typically fewer people on social media. It's not everyone, about 40, 50%, depends on who is there. And how many people have purchased at least once in the last day? Now you see fewer hands, right? So it's really about 20, 30% of the people, okay? So this is really where you can start to try to make sense of all these footprints. Now, the big advantage of this data is that it is observational. Remember in the old days, we would ask questions. And so there was a lot of, the different ways in which we would get insights as customer there was also a tension between the depth or the quality of the insights and the sample size. Because each time you ask a question, each time you run the risk of biasing the people's answer, what people tell you, the people's answer, okay? So what you could do actually is you could observe customers. That's observation over there. But the cost was very, very high. Imagine you run a chain of fast food, for instance. Okay? You could post a guy who is just noting down what people are eating during the morning, during the evening, during lunch, etc., etc. But this was very costly, okay? Then you could do something that also that generated a high level of insights, prototyping, but that was very costly, okay? So you've got a product, but now you really have to create different versions of the products. It takes a lot of time, very costly. I could do something more simple, but more biased, which is focus groups, okay? So those of you who are not familiar with focus groups, it's a very simple marketing techniques. You put 10 people in a room, and you ask them, but what do you think about this product here, this new bottle, okay? So, people start looking at it, and then, there's a guy who really looks like he's more confident than the others, and he's like, I really like it, right? And everyone else is, oh yeah, I think it's a good idea, and I really like it. So very similar to social media, what you do is actually you capture social dynamics, but you do not capture actual intent, okay? And then what you could do is, you could run surveys, and that obviously you would increase the sample size, but that is very costly, okay? Now, all the methods, all the 5 C's that I've just shown you cost very little to run and execute as a company. Some providers that are extremely good at doing that, and that are much lower cost than these traditional marketing techniques. Now, how has this changed? How has big data changed this picture about insight generation? First of all, observation has moved from posting a guy in the restaurant to shopping behavior, to search analytics, and to sensory data, right? You observe what people do on their mobile, you observe what people search, you observe hundreds or millions of shopping footprints every day. What has changed in prototyping is that now you can do a lot of testing on your website and on the devices with which you interact with your customers. If you have an app, you can run 2 versions of an app. If you have a website, you can run 2 versions of a website, etc., etc. Now, focus groups, they've actually turned into the social media analytics. You don't need to run focus groups anymore. Just look at social media sentiment and see what people are saying about different brands. You can also do focus groups online. And surveys actually have moved from both the search and the social media analytics. Okay? So social media is both a qualitative, because you have a lot of rich elements, but it's also highly quantitative at all. Does that make sense? Any questions so far? No? Okay. So now in the rest of the talk, we don't have the time to talk about all 5 S's. So I'm going to focus on search and social. And I'm going to show you that even with these 2, you can actually really revamp the way insights are being created. And I'm going to show you an example of a company, Vinica mentioned it, L'Oreal, that actually did it quite well, and that now is using insight generation as a new business model innovation, so to speak. But just to wrap up this part, very important to start not with the technology, not by saying, I'm going to do big data or I'm going to do IoT, maybe because your competitor does it. Start with the customer, okay? So identify the footprints that matter in your industry, okay? These are generic footprints. Some may be more important for you than in others. Map out the footprints of your customer journey. And in order to do that, what you need to do is you need to turn every touch point into an opportunity to collect data about your customers. Because in a lot of programs that I run, even when we start interacting with these tools and we get the search or the social media data about the company, we run very quickly into a problem, which is, how are people searching us? We don't know. So we have to ask them, or we have to involve our salespeople so they know and they can help us really unpack this novel value. Okay, so let's turn to just this. Let's remove from the picture. Let's have social and search data. Now, there are lots of providers, as I mentioned. These are just some of them. I'm not a shareholder in any of them. The reason I'm showing them is I've been interacting with them either for my teaching or my research. There are many more. You've got some free tools. I'm going to show you Google Trends. There are some more elaborate tools. I do a lot of things with T-Squared Insights. And then on the social side, lots and lots of providers as well that give access to really fantastic types of data. Now, let's go back to search versus social, right? Let's move away for now. Let's move away from what you can do with shopping or site data. Now, the two differences that I'd like us to really be clear about when it comes to search and social. Search is much bigger than social media data, okay? How can we prove it? Well, we did this research with T-Squared Insights, where we did this. This is US data, but we did it in different countries. We did it in Asia, we did it in Europe. What we did is for many brands, okay, we looked at the overall number of search for a certain period and the overall amount of social media for the same brand for the same period. And basically what we find is that the ratio of, this is just like different brands, the ratio of search over social media is actually much, much higher than one, right? So the only thing that this says is there are much, much, much more search data than there is social media data. That makes sense? Okay? Now, the second thing which is interesting goes back to the difference in nature of the data, is that while search is much more quantitative, social media is much more qualitative and reflects public interest. Okay? So can I prove it? Well, yesterday I did something funny. I went on my Facebook and there's a search bar on Facebook, right? So I searched for "my family is," okay? And I received wonderful stuff, right? So my family is the best. It's everything. It's important. It is my strength. This is a the great pleasure, greatest treasure, etc., etc. Lots of really, really positive things. Remember that we are in a public environment, okay? Now, what I did 2 minutes after is I went on Google and I typed exactly the same. My family is, right? And what you see here is, yes, there's my everything, but there's also my family is toxic, it's broken, it's falling apart, etc. So you can see that, I'm not saying that this is truer than the other one, but you can clearly see that there are differences in how people search and how people imprint and how people work with social media, right? So search is really more of a private behavior, very, very good at looking at recovering intent of customers. Social media is more about public sentiment, social dynamics, what we think about products in general. That makes sense? Yeah? Okay. So now the next step really and I'm going to go quite quickly over these. The next step is really to see, okay, now that we understand these two footprints, search and social, how can we then leverage it at different stages of your strategy, right? And that's where the idea here that I have is, now that you're still on the beach, you have identified the right footprints that are relevant, that are indicative of very interesting customer behavior that you want. What you want now is a harvesting machine. Right? You don't want to collect all the data. That's why big data is wrong. You want to collect the right data after you've identified that they're meaningfully recovering some sort of customer behavior in your industry, right? And so that's where we turn to, who are we going to listen to? Obviously, we can listen to the customers, but everyone is actually searching, and most everyone is on social media. So the goal is really to move from who are you going to listen to? What are the actors? Where are you going to listen to? What are going to be the platforms? And then who is it going to be relevant to? Okay? So short answer about this, you can look at the customers. Customers will be on social and they'll be on search. You can look at what your collaborators are doing. Okay? They can be sometimes on social media. They can have their own websites. They can have professional bloggers. You can look at your competitors. Okay? That's something very often I find in my programs is so easy to really capture what the websites of your competitors are recovering or are communicating and get a sense for what's the space that you're competing with. Okay? By the way, just one anecdote to show you that it's really not about the size of the data that matters. So in a prior life, I was working with a social media analytics company, and we were approached by a very big engineering French company. And they said, we're really scared. We have a competitor who is going to open a plant in a country soon. Okay? It's going to be in 6 months. It's going to take some time, but we need to have this information as soon as possible. Okay? And we don't know whether it's going to be country A, country B, or country C. Okay? Can you help us with this? Okay? What do you think we listen to? What do you think, what is the footprint that we recovered? Any ideas? Something very easy, logical. Well, get to know me, I'm a very logical person. Very simple. Yes?
For example, see if there was green beans in a certain country of new positions.
So that's a great point, right? So what do you need to open a plant? You need some sort of permit, but that's too late, and that's not digital. But you need also a workforce, right? And so you're going to look for LinkedIn posts about competitor A, B, or C, but you can also expand your scope to other platforms. You can look at monsters, you can look at different job ads, etc., which is exactly what we did. And so we found that there was a massive increase in country A, nothing in country B, nothing in country C. So we went back to the client and we said, it's probably going to be country A, but we're not 100% sure, but, and in fact, it was country A. So this short story to tell you that it's really not a matter of the size of the data, but the quality of the footprints and how it is indicative of what you want to capture in the customer journey. Sense? Okay, so we talked about collaborators, the competitors. You can also listen to yourself. My good friend who I have the great pleasure to welcome in my course, Jamshed Wadia, who is the head of digital marketing at Intel for Asia Pacific, came up with a very, very innovative strategy, and now it's a few years back, where he said, I need people who will be communicating on my behalf. I need advocates. Now, I can have advocates among the customers, but the people who know my product better are the people inside the organization. So can I try to listen to my collaborators and seeing which ones I'm most likely to being able to turn them around as advocates? And then he created a training program. He created a training platform that really helped push on this objective. And then finally, you've got the context. You've got like media, online, sources, et cetera, et cetera. So just very quickly, let me show you a couple of examples of what you can do with this. So one of the things you can do, and I'm going to go through the classic marketing. Again, I'm a simple guy. Marketing is very simple. When you want to create a product, segmentation, targeting, positioning, and then the marketing actions, okay? Regardless of whether you're B2B or B2C. So one of the things you could do actually with search is you can move from kind of old-fashioned segmentation to keyword-based segmentation. What do I mean is, what you can do is you can recover millions and millions of historical footprints that will give you, anonymously, obviously, but the history of search over a period of 6 months of 3 or 4 or 5 million individuals. And so what you can do then, you can start segmenting based on different keywords that the same individual has been inputting at different time points. So this is something that we did for the luxury watchmaking industry, where the idea was, can we recreate brand maps? I'm sure that most of you are familiar with brand maps. Brand maps is really a perceptual maps that looks at proximity between brands, okay? How INSEAD is close to Harvard or MIT, etc. So here we really look at something very simple, which is search-based proximity. If I have individual level data, I can look the extent to which if a person has searched for Rolex, he or she has also searched for Omega, for instance. And so what I'm going to show you is based on 4 million data points from a European country, and you can see that the closer the brands are, the closer they're associated in the search history of customers. Now, the great thing in terms of segmentation is that you move from each time you want to add the data, you need to ask the customer, oh, we forgot to ask him about his gender, or oh, we forgot to ask him about his past history. You can move from that to a multi-dimensional space where you can say, first of all, you can say, does this make sense? It actually makes sense. You've got the slightly higher priced watches on the right. You've got the slightly more affordable watches on the left. You've got those that are more tech-related on the top, and those that are differentiated more on aesthetics, on how they look at the bottom. But then you can correlate it with any of the keywords that these guys have searched. So you can say, for instance, which is at the time a big question in the luxury industry, you can say, but what is the brand that is most associated with smartwatch? Okay? And so you can just look at that, and you see that here, the reds are those that in this space are also most associated, have also been the highest likelihood of searching for smartwatches. Non-surprisingly, you see Tag Heuer. So we have an excellent colleague, Felipe Montero, who wrote a case on this. But you see really how these kind of maps can really multiply the power of how we understand the customers. Can give you lots of different examples, uncover competitive insights. So you can say, there's an Indian example, Netflix and Amazon from 2014 to now. And you see that Netflix was introduced here, and something happened where they became quite more popular than Amazon Prime at least. So they did a few things. So part of it was offline strategy, the fact that they were more aggressive on their pricing. But part of it is also that they had a different content strategy. Okay, so then you can look at the type of shows that they started creating. So I'm not an expert, by the way, about Indian shows, but apparently I've been told that this game was particularly popular. This TV series was popular, Sacred Games. And what you see here indeed is that when you want to assess the success or the rise of the blue bar, you see that you need to understand what type of content is actually supporting the interest in search for this particular product, right? So it's really about understanding what type of searches is associated with my brand or my product searches, okay? So that's one example. Another one, which I really like, we're working on it right now, is about brand valuation. I've mentioned that I'm quite interested in luxury consumption. And one question, you may have heard in the news that Bernard Arnault recently acquired Tiffany for $16 billion. Now, was this too much? Think it was overpriced? We think it was a good deal, right? And by the way, what about all these other luxury brands which really rest on the conspicuous value that they offer to the customers? So, done a lot of work on luxury, and luxury brands essentially are good because they mix two things. They mix visibility benefits, okay, and they mix exclusivity benefits. So this is a Chateau Rothschild from 1945. It's very good, but very, very, very exclusive. So now if we go back to our footprint story, right, we can look at different types of searches, and in particular, we can look at image search, web searches, YouTube, and news. And so going back at this visibility versus exclusivity, you can say, well, the more people are sensitive to visibility benefits of the brand, the more they're going to search for images, okay? Now, exclusivity is going to be reflected by the overall amount, or it's going to be correlated by the web searches of a company, okay? So what you see, this is, for instance, when you type Rolls-Royce, okay, on web and on images, you only have images. And you can do this in the car industry, where this is just like 5 cars, Hyundai, Volkswagen, BMW, Porsche, and Ferrari, with they're all increasing in price, and you can look at the ratio between image search over web searches. And it's a linearly increasing function of price, okay? So what a ratio of below 1 means is that people are searching more for web than image. What a ratio of above 1 means, it means that people search for images of your brand rather than technical information about the brand, okay? So obviously we've done this with within brand as well. So this is for Porsche, different types of cars, and we've done it in many different industries. It works, in most industries with some. With a variety, obviously, with differences in significance, but very, very, very good. Very quickly also, what I wanted to say is now that you've moved from strategy design to strategy execution to assessment of results, it's very good. Google Analytics are also a very good way of assessing how well you've done. This example actually that came from one of our programs. It's the search for Toyota, okay, in the UK from, I believe, 2014 to now. And what you see is like slowly decreasing up to a point, and then there's something that seems to have sparked a regain in search, okay? So then you need to, have contacts in Toyota, and you say, okay, that's exactly the moment where we run this campaign. So let me show you what the campaign is about.
As the world moves forward, what will your choice be? The new Corolla. Move ahead. Choose hybrid.
So a very interesting, very interesting example of advertising execution, repositioning around hybrid. And so we've seen the effect of this ad on search terms for Toyota. Obviously, that's not enough, right? Then you need to correlate it with your sales. But what you can do also with a lot of these search analytics, by the way, all these tools are free. The Google Trends tool is free. So all of these analyses that I'm showing you now, you can do them right away. So what you can do actually is you can say, well, remember, it's really about repositioning. So was the repositioning around hybrid effective? So what you can do is you can say, what are the associated terms that people were typing with Toyota maybe 3 months before the ad was run and 3 months after the ad was run. And so, sorry, it's a bit small, but you can see that before it was really about the price, it was about reviews about Toyotas, et cetera, et cetera. After, what you see is that the first keyword is really charging, hybrid, Corolla, which is the name of the car that they reposition. So it gives you a lot of insights about effectiveness of the campaign. And this is just the same analysis, but from 2004 to 2019, where you can now have a way to quantify the value of different advertising strategies. Okay? So just to wrap up this part, I think what's really important when it comes to transforming data into insights is to map out where search and social footprints matter in your market and strategic challenges. You start with the question, not start with the data. Select the right data according to its strategic and psychological value, not its size, okay? And finally, and you can do this freely again, develop proprietary visual tools, simple tools, right, that can help you gain competitive advantages regarding trends in your market and assess market effectiveness, okay? Now, I have a last thing I want to show you before opening up to questions, and that is I really want to show you how it's done in practice, okay? So I was fortunate enough, Vinika mentioned it, to work with L'Oreal, And so the specific case about it, the reason why I really like it is because it was really not about the data, but how was insight integration executed at L'Oréal Paris. So this is for those of you, some people work in the beauty industry here, or? Okay, so we're some experts, so we'll maybe ask you some questions about the hairstyles. Very competitive industry, okay, where you need to roll out new products. And so every year, you've got, this was in 2012 when they started to execute this strategy, you have these informants who tell you about 2, 3, 4 hairstyles that have the potential of becoming trend, okay? So here we have, this is for the guys in the audience. I'm sure the ladies know it by heart, but this is ombre, so when you have dark hair and you finish in blonde, tie-dye, and splat hair. And when you're at L'Oréal, you're really thinking, you know, how can I take advantage of it? Which is going to be the trend that is going, or the hairstyle that is going to transform into an actual trend, okay? So what's very important in this case is not, again, to start with the data, but start with the strategy question, okay? So here at L'Oréal, we have 2 questions, okay? 2 types of questions, sorry. The first set of questions is actually about quantity, quantitative. You know, we want some market sizing. Which hairstyle are we going to bet on? If I have 10 million of research budget, advertising dollar budget, am I going to put them on hairstyle A, hairstyle B, hairstyle C? So what's going to be the market potential? And what's going to be the area? Is it going to be Asia, Europe, US? What states in US, right? I want to be as specific as possible. And then obviously we're L'Oréal, so we brand something. So it's going to be about how we position ourselves, right? And what value do we bring as L'Oréal? So some sets of questions are going to be quantitative, some others are going to be qualitative, okay? And so then the beauty of what they did was really to link these 2 areas, these 2 big questions, into which decisions do I have to make as a marketer and integrate every insight into each of these decisions. So which product to develop? How do I segment? How do I choose my segment? How am I going to target? How am I going to position? And then the more mundane and operational questions, but still very important. How do I price? What's the packaging going to look like? How do we communicate? Where do I sell? Is it going to be online, offline, et cetera, et cetera? So they did basically this. So it started with, for quantitative research, they went for what? Where do you think they went? Based on our conversation. Search, right? So they went on search. They did exactly what we have been doing for the last 20 minutes. They went on Google Trends, and they saw, interesting, that tie-dye and splat hair are actually flat, while the ombre hair is rising, right? So it seems like there's something about ombre that is very specific. Obviously, then you can run different tests. One test, for instance, that you can do is you say, okay, across countries, people may not use the same term. So then that's where you need secondary informants, which can be salespeople, which can be different influencers. And then you learn that the same hairstyle is dubbed deep dye in British English, mechas californianas in Spanish, los fumato in Italian, ombre with an accent in French, et cetera, et cetera. And what you see is, like, at the time of the case, okay, across everything, there's something going on, right? So that's how you really feel like if I have my 10 millions to put in one basket, it's really going to be ombre and not the 2 others, okay? Now, remember, I have 2 questions. One is really quantitative, the other is qualitative, and for that, I'm going to turn to social. Thank you very much. Okay, so we go there, and there are lots and lots of do-it-yourself video like this. I'm going to show you, let's see if I can do this without sound here. Oh, I'm going to turn it. So I'm going to show you not everything, but you know what do-it-yourself videos look like. That's kind of the data that they worked on, okay? So I turned off the volume, and I'm going to do the voiceover. So you see there are 2 girls, okay? And there's no product. So what they do is they use a complementary set of products to create the hairstyle. You see that there's some subtitles, so it's something that they put some effort on. What they do is actually they tell you all the products that they start using. They tell you the quantity that they're using. They start doing something very, very interesting and complicated with a bowl, and then they start putting foil. Okay, so that's interesting. It's like another type of material that we need to look into. And then look at what they're doing here. They're using a Toothbrush, right? So that's interesting. That's insights, okay? And then they apply it. They apply it to their hair, and then they dry it, and the rest of the video is not super interesting, right? But what did we learn that search data didn't tell us? So we're going to do something with the brush, right? Because, you know, for those of you who have, anyone has daughters in the audience? No? Yeah? So when you go back at night and your toothbrush, smells weird, you know what they do now during the day. Huh? So that's what they do. So we're going to have the brush, okay? Who are we going to position? How are we going to position the product? This seems very complex, so we're going to make it quite easy, right? For something. It seems like it's a process, right? So we're not going to sell like some sort of, tube or whatever. We're going to create some sort of combo, right? We also have information about, or perhaps insight about, who are we going to communicate the product for us? These two girls. How do you think they would feel if you said, you remember the videos that you talked about? Here's the product that we talked about, yes, that you told us, and this is the answer. Very well. And then all the marketing tactics, right? You can also derive the price, the right pricing, because you know what product that they use. You can perhaps look from other videos about where they get the different products, etc., etc., etc. And so what they did, I'm first going to show you what they did, and then I'll tell you a little bit more about the process. All right.
Dip dye into Wild Ombre, the easy trend to blend. New Preference Wild Ombre from L'Oreal. Its formula blends perfectly for a graduated lightning effect. The brush, so easy to use. Start from 2/3 down and brush towards the tips, whatever your hairstyle. Wild Ombre, our first dip dye kit from Preference by L'Oreal Paris.
So you dreamt about it, and L'Oreal did it. Hop, ta-da! It's the first, one of the first, actually, only digitally powered product. Obviously now many companies are doing the same, but you can see how they included all of the insights into the new product development process, and why earlier I made the point that it was not about data integration but insight integration. Okay, so if you want to just pass it around, there's if you want to try it. That's fine too for me. But just to close very briefly, what they did here, I think, as a process, is that they look at the areas where they have to make a decision as a company. You could be a B2C retail manufacturer like them. You could be a B2B company. You can be a retailer. It all applies in the same way. You look at the digital data, and particularly search and social media, not only from the customers, but from what other people have done. You do it very systematically as a process, and then you integrate every insight into the decision process, okay? Yes, there is market potential. We're going to include the brush. We're going to make it easy. We're going to use the name Ombre because that's what people use. And we are going to get back at these two girls because they will love it. They will love it. And so you see how marketing and new product creation in a digital world has become increasingly easy. So from a strategy standpoint, and that's really the last but one slide, I think I've become a little bit late, is really how you can create value loops in your organization. That's the best term I've come to describe this new strategy process to date. Value loop meaning how can you extract systematically information from the right footprint, now that we know that there's a formula, integrate it into the decisions that you have to make as a brand, and then pull them back through the same channels, so through search, social media, and so on, to the relevant audiences, okay? So just to wrap up in this part, what's very important here is identify the decision-making areas or new skills that you aim to improve through big data. What do you want to make it better? What's your Ombre product? Right? Is it you want to improve HR processes? Do you want to improve marketing processes? Do you want to improve your retail presence, et cetera, et cetera? Then feed the insights to the relevant decision makers. Okay, so that means that the data needs to be freely flowing within the marketing teams, the new product development teams, etc. And that's where, by the way, we get at the the volume, the variety, etc. All these things matter. And finally, design and implement value loops within your organization to turn yourself into learning agents, because that will be my last word. In the digital world, the source of the significant sources of competitive advantage doesn't lie in how well you execute on one particular technology, but remember, because there's all these waves of successive technological disruptions, successful competitive advantage lies in your ability to turn yourself into a learning agent. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. Time for questions. Any question? Yes, please.
So for the public data, I think one of the drawbacks is I can make all the decision on that, but it's hard for me to track the actual performance after I made the decision. So if I launch a product, because it's public data, it's not of my control, I can always set an A/B testing or control group.
Yes.
How can I quantify the effect?
So that's a great question, right? So your question was, okay, let's assume we have the search data, the social media data, we launched the product, right? How do we create feedback loop where we can get data in a more in a much closer, much more, much faster than we could? Because in this example, for instance, once you design the new product, L'Oréal designs a new product, the data is going to sit with the retailer, right? So what they did actually, not in the product that I'm actually circulating, but what they did is actually include a QR code in the packaging. Now, it's not, you cannot always do this, but the way they thought about this was to get some sort of immediate feedback about actual purchases, right? And that helped them actually to prioritize marketing investments depending on whether it was in Germany, Portugal, Japan, et cetera, et cetera. Now, it's not always possible, so I'm not suggesting. Sometimes it's going to be QR code. Sometimes you're going to use IoT, and so it's going to be much more for liquid consumption than a solid consumption. And sometimes, obviously, you need to restructure the way the sales data is to make it match as much as possible with this new source of data. Right? So that's the best answer I have. Anything else? Please. Yes.
What you have presented very much is for the consumer market.
Mm-hmm.
So your model, the framework that you have shared,
Mm-hmm.
would there be any need for variation, adaptation for, say, industrial products or industrial services, engineering services that are non-consumer oriented?
Yeah.
The whole concept of search versus social, and then in the context of 5S.
Yeah.
Would you see any?
Yeah. So that's a great question. I think I'm going to answer because in two ways. So one is to acknowledge the fact that it's in some areas it's perhaps a bit more difficult in services. Right now there's a lot in luxury, which is a market I follow very closely. We move from material luxury to experiential luxury, right? And it's much more difficult to capture the search that people are using for experiential luxury than material luxury because it's not based on the product, right? So then it's up to you to think, okay, how can I leverage my retail, my salespeople from being a push. From pushing the value to the customers, become pull value in the sense that they start questioning the customers, getting the search data inside from outside in some sense. Now,
so would search be more valuable than social in that sense?
Yeah. So again, it varies by industries. Let me show you one example. So one of the very interesting latest cases that I've been working on is with a French company called Air Liquide. And Air Liquide is actually one of the largest provider of industrial gas in the world. And they were persuaded that actually the flagship product that they sell was named cylinder, so gas cylinder, okay? Now, what's really happening in this market is that you're moving from kind of a more expert market to a more novice market, so the long tail of the market, which is happening in many, many markets, right? And in this market, what they used and leveraged search with is that they realized that people actually are not searching for gas cylinder anymore, but they're searching more and more for gas bottle, just very simply. So this is a very simple shift. I'll show you here the graph, so it's a bit more vivid. Huh? So it's really a company that manufactures like cylinders of gas. I mean, they also do install gas in larger bulks. And they can do plants like this. But what you see here is even in B2B, people search. And what you see is that the number of people who search for gas bottle is actually really increasing, and that maps really a change in the market. Okay, so I have evidence that it works both in B2B, B2C, but obviously, I would say what really needs to happen is a change in the mindset in how you collect the data about the search. Right? You can't really go to a digital analytics provider if you're and tell him, hey, tell us more about this, because he or she may not know what the right keywords is. Yeah, great, you're welcome. Please.
So all the examples you've given so far are using search and social media data at aggregate level, right?
Yes. Not the brand maps. Not the brand map for the luxury.
Yeah, but aggregate in terms of the population. You're not looking at individual information. But when you're doing things like segmentation, targeted marketing, then you would need to have more granular level of information. Yeah. With GDPR and with the privacy concern, how do you see this going forward?
So it's a great question. It's very often the case. That's why when I introduced this 5S framework, I always mention that you need to have some sort of granularity. As soon as you move from granular to individual, then that's when you start having some sort of issue with the GDPR, because
some kind of segment level.
Exactly. So then you have to really find. So there are two ways to go around it, right? One is really to define what granularity means and really try to work with the data providers that are offering like the right level of granularity, right? So we could say, what are the people in this room thinking, right? That's at the level, because you have the IP address, you have et cetera.
Yeah, but that's the challenge where how do you match the granularity from different providers? Like say Google or
Facebook, they provide at different granular level, but how do you match that? How do you say segment A from Google matches with segment B from Facebook? How do you have to define something, right? Some metrics yourself?
So I think what you're saying is then you have different providers that provide different levels of granularity on the platforms, right? And you have to. That's why you have to first need to say what is the level of granularity that matters in your industry and your organization. Is it county level? Is it state level? Is it like city level? And then you have to work inside out and say, because there are so many of these providers, what are the ones across social, search, site, etc., that's going to help me recover insights using the same level of granularity? That's the best answer. Yeah.
David?
Yes.
You talked about the brand.
Tell me. Yes.
What are the triggers today of brand collaboration? Because we see more and more like those high brand and collaborated with other brands and creating this scarce product. And what are for you, have you studied that? Why two brands will collaborate at some point of time? What are the value, the trigger?
Pooling data, right? So I think it's still very early in its maturity, right? So what really you're talking about is saying,
in the retail industry.
What was that?
In the retail.
In the retail. So I think there are a lot of areas where there are benefits in collaborating with one another. And I'm sure that if you spend a little bit more time after the talk discussing with one another, you may actually realize that some of the data that some of you have may be useful for someone else and vice versa, right? I think what I've seen, again, in the N=1, I mean, I've talked to some companies, is that it's very difficult to, so the stage about discussing the data is there. But when it comes to sharing data, that's where you need to find like win-win agreements, right? But you're absolutely right, because I think that's another term that I really hate is data lake, right? So everyone is telling you, if you don't have a data lake, it's you're going to be eaten by competition, etc. I always answer to this. Well, you don't have to start with a data lake, okay? Start maybe with looking at what data pond you have in your organization. Okay. Then look at the neighbor, and your neighbor has another data pond. Okay. And then maybe the neighbor across is a third pond. And so if you start adding up 1 pond plus 1 pond plus 1 pond, you start having a mini lake, and the mini lake is better than nothing, right? So great point.
To make a point about what you were saying in terms of collaboration between data and brand. One large social site has observed that when people change jobs, they also buy a specific brand of cars. So when they move up the ladder, they change cars. So that's a very vital information for a car company.
Thank you. That's great. Absolutely. Anything else? Yes, please.
Two questions. One on first the social. So when you see the search data, especially when you see a new term being introduced and you see that trending upwards, could it be that it's because of the novelty associated with something new versus the familiarity with something that's already there, which is resulting in a slightly higher upward trend? And how do you kind of discount for that factor, number one? The second question was relating to social. When you have all of these fake reviews and all that stuff, how does it impact the quality of the data? Because you talked about social being qualitative.
Yeah.
So with a lot of these bots and possibly fake reviews, isn't there a chance that there will be a lot of noise in the social data that you're talking about?
Yes, both are great questions. First one is really about the search and the kind of potential bias of the data. So there could be different things, right, explaining why there are a specific spike in search for something. And you always have to, that's why, one, you always have to cross that search data with anything, with offline data that may explain what's happening with it with search. And second thing that you can actually do, and that you should always do, is have the search data being comparative in nature, right? So you really see whether a spike is actually increasing compared to another search pattern. For the social, it's true, like there's there can be a lot of bias. There's a lot of boots. Each time there's a bot, like some other, the providers are trying to solve that bot, and then some people come with another ways to get at it. So it depends on what type of data you talk about. One thing I want to say, and it goes back to the practice of how you integrate the insights, is that you shouldn't let the data sit in or sitting by itself, or you shouldn't let like a data provider only tell you what's happening, right? Someone in your organization should be in charge of like data cleaning, keeping an eye on the data, and making sure that you get some of that knowledge, right? Obviously, in the digital world, you're not going to compete with Google, okay? You're not going to compete with digital analytics company, but having a 20-year-old intern who is in charge of looking at that social media data is actually what a lot of organizations do, and which is actually even worse than doing nothing, right? Because and if you're not ready for digital, it's better not to go in digital. I mean, let's be clear about it. So hope it answers.
Nowadays, especially with platforms, you have so many data points across social engagement, customer pool. So there is a depth of data in each of these dimensions that you go to, and then there is the huge customer base, and then you analyze them. So are there any best practices in how you achieve the best set of insights for driving customer behavior on certain parameters like transactions or
compared to, so let me help me a little bit with the question. So is the question like, are there different types of practices or strategies for where you want to impact the customer journey, or?
So is there like a balance between the depth of the data that you analyze and the width and the...
So there's no good answer to this, right? There should be some breadth, at least. That's why I talk at least about two types of data, social and search, right? Like really providing like some sort of convergence in the data, right? I mean, if you're L'Oreal, you're not going to put all your old baskets just because you did a Google Trends graph and you saw, oh, ombre is rising, so let's do it, right? So you try to look at it from different angles. There's no, what I would recommend is having at least 2 or 3 sources to provide convergence on the effect, and having also and so that's for, I would say, the breadth of data, right? And then the depth is I would say very context specific, right? Because it depends on what you want to look at. Is it image? Is it videos, etc.? So that's difficult to go. Obviously, there is always a cost-benefit analysis, right? So you don't want to go too deep, and so that's why it's important to start with the questions, okay? And challenge the people who are asking for the data on their questions, right? What is the market size? Okay, we can tell you that, right? We can tell you the market growth, very difficult, right? That's the best you can do on depth and breadth. But great question. Anyone else? No? Yes, gentleman on the...
So when looking at like social specifically, do you see any variance between or any insights on the quality of data from varying social sites, so like a Twitter versus a YouTube? Like, is there a variance between social as well and how you look at that data?
Variance in what?
The quality of data or the type of data you can gather from these different social sites?
Well, I think typically you don't get data directly from these people. So there are some variations in how you can get the data, right? Some sources like Facebook, have some sort of integrated tool that helps you to pull out some of the data. For Twitter, you need to have other methods to pull out the data. So I don't see a big difference. I think that again goes back to the prior question. Like, probably need to have multiple sources to try to triangulate and say, okay, this is really what's happening in the market, right? So, great question. I think we're good. Great. So that was the last question. Are there any other questions? After we're done. I mean, I'm around. So thank you once again, and look forward to continuing the conversation. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, David. Very insightful. I've learned a lot of new things. And I want to thank everyone for some wonderful questions. Clearly this is something that's very exciting to us. Do send in your comments, send in your feedback. And if there's anything else that you'd like to hear more about, let us know. Thank you and have a good night.